you live now.
Okay, members, thank you. Agus to Fáilte Roe Lig, all very welcome to this morning's meeting. We have a quorum and I call the meeting to order and welcome each of you here today. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken, please. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of microphones throughout the meeting. Finally, I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do members have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda items? No. Members content? Thank you. Then, apologies. Clerk, are we aware of any apologies?
No.
Members, aware of any apologies? No, thank you. Moving on then, members, to Chair's business. So, members, I welcome the Minister accepted late in the day the committee amendment to the Pensions Automatic Enrolment Bill. It is something that will maybe raised later in the session with Permanent Secretary and senior officials in terms of the absence of any communication on that issue. I also welcome the Minister's statement in relation to the intimidation points policy change and would request that committee receive a briefing from departmental officials at the earliest possible opportunity. Are members agreed?
Agreed,
yeah. And finally, members, I would also welcome the announcement on the 1 million Storm Fund, and would also propose maybe to request a written briefing on that to explain the criteria for how that will be distributed. Would members be agreed?
Yep, agreed, yeah.
Thanks, members. So members, moving on to agenda item 3, which is draft minutes, and I'll refer you to the meeting pack at page 7 there. Draft minutes are contained. Are members content to agree the minutes of 23rd of January as drafted? Yeah. Thank you, members. And then moving on, members, to matters arising. So we have been provided there with a summary table of matters arising at page 19. I will, as we have got into the habit of doing, go through those replies in groups, and I would ask if you wish to highlight anything from the responses within those particular groups. So we'll start off then with items 4.2 to 4.4 inclusive. Are there any items within there that anyone wants to discuss further or comment upon? No, I think members are content. Okay, members content, thank you. Moving on to items 4.5 to 4.7. Are there any items within that chunk of members wish to raise or highlight? No, members content. Okay, thank you, members. The table papers then, members, contains 4.9, which is page 3. Item 4.9 is page 3 of your table pack. It's about the proposals for regulations on welfare reform and the timing of these versus the briefing from officials. The SL1s are on the agenda today for consideration, and we can discuss further during items 6, 7 and 8 in our agenda. Members are content? Okay, thanks, members. Agenda item 5 then is correspondence. The correspondence memo is at page 82, and there's a tabled correspondence memo at page in your table papers there. As per the approach to matters arising, I would intend to go through these items by number and grouped, and ask if you wish to draw out or seek further information or highlight anything in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So we'll go there, members, to item. The first block is item 5.2 to 5.5. Are there any issues there that members wish to discuss or highlight? Sian?
Yeah, just that PAC report on child poverty in Northern Ireland. I'm just wondering why the department couldn't fully accept the recommendations. It would just be good to get an idea of what part of the recommendations the department are willing to accept and what they would struggle to. That would be really useful to understand, particularly just when we're looking at things that can be learned, I suppose, for the anti-poverty strategy rollout. I would be really keen to understand.
Yep, members content to seek further information in relation to that. Yep, thank you. Deputy Chair?
Just in relation to the Sign Language Bill, and obviously we welcome the progress in that moving forward. I would just be interested to know what further engagement now the department had, given that we're at this stage now, because I'm conscious when looking at the bill, many of the key ambitions in it is tied within regulations. So I would like to really see how the groups feel about that, and specifically in relation to the regulations, how they would like to see them, timelines, deadlines, etc., what should be included within them. So if that would be possible.
Yeah. So just to say that the letter and that the bill is yet to be introduced on sign language and has been provided in confidence there, and this should be observed until the first stage, at which there will be an option in a couple of weeks' time, and officials then will be due to attend that week's committee. And at that, they'll be providing a high-level overview and the chronology of what it has taken to get the bill to this stage of introduction. So that is coming up in our forward work programme, just to flag up to members. Brian, go ahead.
Well, just as Ciara raised the sign language bill, just to welcome that that will complete the legislation that the Minister undertook to bring forward in the current year. And we look forward to seeing that being introduced in February.
Okay, thank you. So members, moving, anything else from 5.2 to 5.5? Are members content? Thank you. Moving on to 5.6 to 5.9, members. Are there any items you wish to discuss? And I will just highlight the fact that in relation to 5.8, would you be content that a draft response is collated and brought back for review at a later date in relation to that 5.8 to Committee for Finance? Yeah, members content, thank you. So any other then members issues in between from 5.6 to 5.8? Ciara?
Just in relation to the SIB, and obviously, and it's really, really useful every quarter that we are getting that update of constructions. And just in relation to updates, I noticed one specific, and maybe I could follow up myself, I'm not too sure, is it something the department could do just in relation to updates? I was under the assumption that specifically one of the projects, particularly in Derry, which is Craigan, was already in procurement, but according to this, it's still in pre-procurement. But I assumed it was in procurement and that would complete on the 31st of March, the procurement process. So just in relation to maybe that specific one, could we follow up just in relation to the accuracy of that report?
Which project?
It's Craigan ME1 and it's in the pre-procurement construction works list.
Okay, members, anything else in 5.6 to 5.9? No. Members then otherwise content as per the memo. Moving on then to further correspondence items which are in the table pack, and those can be, there's a table there at 5.11. We're taking items 5.11 to 5.16, and they're from page 8 to page 53 of the table pack. So just to flag in relation to 5.11, we will receive a briefing from the department on the 20th of February meeting in relation to that item. That's the fuel payment, minor changes to the emergency fuel payment. And in relation to 5.14, just to note that there's a committee PRONI meeting in PRONI being provisionally planned for 22nd of May. So any other items within that 5.11 to 5.16 that members wish to flag? Andy?
Just 513, Chair, and obviously I know DFC may say it's not their statutory responsibility, but the removal of Rule 23, and obviously whilst there's been various different commentary around it, welcoming it, etc., obviously it will leave a vulnerability there for people who are still being intimidated within our communities, and I get a lot of the commentary around it and concerns, but how is that going to be monitored moving forward? Because I'm concerned that, it could gloss over the true reality of what's happening in many of our communities, and I indeed do see it regularly, unfortunately, that people are still being intimidated by individuals masquerading as paramilitaries, and we need to obviously redouble our efforts to remove them from our communities, but they're still intimidating people, and I'm just concerned that that was the route in which quite often the data was captured for the amount of intimidation that was happening within our communities, just to see if DFC are going to propose, working with executive colleagues, a monitoring system. Obviously, hopefully we get to the point where it's completely eradicated, but that's not presently where we are.
Yeah, and yeah, certainly, and that's why I raised that. And while the statement coming to the chamber is certainly an indication that there's work going on around this, I think we do need to know much more of the detail, and therefore we have asked in the earlier part of the meeting for that briefing to take place, where I think further detail, because we do need to see further detail, and there are concerns and there are genuine issues arising, particularly around that day 23, and I did ask about that in the chamber as well, because the implementation of that will be crucial, and the monitoring of it to ensure that we don't. There's not too long a time lag before we realise that there are still things going on which the system is not picking up. So I think that's a crucial issue, and one we will have to keep a close eye on.
I'm just conscious, and I would concur with Andy, I'm just conscious there is a cliff age because it's the 31st of March and doing away with it. Whilst I think and the Minister made it kind of clear maybe before the end of the year in relation to personal social needs and the review of that and stuff. So currently on the 31st of March, what would be the impact? I think an impact assessment is required, particularly those that we need to be crucially supporting. So what's the change and what's the impact of the change come the 31st of March? I think I would like to have more information on.
Going to be monitored
and how's that
in real
yeah,
time.
Yeah.
And how will there be enough flex in the system to ensure that where intimidation of that nature is happening, that's still being addressed and accounted for, and dealt with. Okay, members, and members otherwise content with the correspondence memo there at 5.11 to 5.16 of tabled? Yep. Okay, thank you, members. So, members, in relation to the next three SL1s then, the officials will be available to brief at the meeting on the 20th of February, which I mentioned there earlier. So if there are any queries on the SL1s, what I would suggest is we ask them in writing today, so that we can hopefully get answers in time for the briefing session on the 20th of February. In that case, that being the case, I'd slightly change the wording of our agreement on these to ensure that we aren't agreeing to anything without the questions. If questions are asked, that we will include that it's subject to those questions being answered. So that will be reflected in the formal question that we put on that item. So I will go then to agenda item 6, which is SL1, the draft Universal Credit Welfare Supplementary Payment Regulations, NI 2025, and they're contained at page 148 of your pack. The proposed rule will make provision for welfare supplementary payments for people currently in receipt of universal credit and for those who move to universal credit in the future. Do members have any comments in relation to that, or are you content for the Department to proceed to make the rule subject to any further questions being answered? So, questions on that item, members? Kelly?
I'm in agreement of the welfare supplementary payments being extended. However, it's been extended without a review of the potentials that could have been brought in. I think I would like to know from the department, the two-child cap is still there. And while the existing current mitigations appear to be doing their work, what other actions could something like introducing the two-child cap, what costs could it have been, what effects could it have had on poverty, for instance, could have been useful to have. And I would be interested to know, while the extension's going on, what consideration was made to adding additional in or having any work done on that.
Yeah. And we have heard evidence from Cliff Edge Coalition and others in relation to that very issue. Okay, members content with that question? Any other questions or queries on that item? No. Thank you, members. So, okay, so members content to proceed to make the rule subject to further questions being answered. Thank you. Members are content with that, yes? Agenda item 7, SL1, the draft Universal Credit Welfare Supplementary Payment Social Sector Size Criteria Regulations, NI 2025, and those are page 156 of your pack. The proposed rule will make provision for welfare supplementary payments for people currently in receipt of universal credit and for those who move to universal credit in the future who are impacted by the social sector size criteria. So, members, any comment or questions in relation to that item? No? So are members then content that the department proceed to make the rule subject to any further questions being answered? Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 8 is the draft welfare supplementary payment extension regulations NI 2025. The proposed rule will make provision for welfare supplementary payments to continue to be paid for the benefit cap, employment and support allowance time limiting, transition from disability living allowance to personal independent payment, loss of disability related premiums and loss of carer payments until 31st of March 2028. It will also ensure that scenarios that led to certain exclusions from mitigation in relation to the benefit cap and social sector size criteria prior to 10th of February 2022 will not be reapplied. So do members have any comments or questions in relation to that SL1? Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
Just regarding all of these, just to welcome that the Minister has extended them for 3 years, and I think rather than these just coming back every year and then there being uncertainty, that there is now certainty for people, and we trust that will be followed through in full, and it is welcome that there is now that certainty for 3 years.
Thank you, Brian. Agenda item 9, Clark, am I? Yep,
Yeah.
moving in. So we're moving on then to agenda item 9, another SL1, and this one is in relation to the Period Products Department for Communities Specified Public Service Bodies, Regulations NI 2024, and they're contained at page 171. So members, the proposed rule here will ensure the department fulfils its statutory duty under the Period Products Free Provision Act NI 2022 to make regulations specifying the public service bodies within its functions that are subject to the duty under the Act to establish and maintain arrangements to ensure that period products are obtainable free of charge by persons on their premises who need to use them. Do members have any comments, or are they content for the department? So just Kelly first and then Sean.
Right, Sean, if you want to go on.
No, I think
Go on ahead.
I was just going to ask, it lists the public service bodies. It would be nice to know the clarification. Public service bodies in themselves are organisations. What I'm interested to find out is, say for instance, something like the National Museums and Galleries of Northern Ireland. Are each of the museums or each of the individual premises then required to comply with the period products, or just the public service body?
Yeah, that I wondered about that. I think that's a really interesting one to get more detail on. I agree.
Yeah, and following on from that, I was just around those that don't meet that definition, so that NI Museums Council and like Forest and Gale, Ulster Scots, what will be put in place there? Is that just that they do not have any onus to deliver this? I think that would be really good just to get a wee bit of clarification.
Yep, I agree. Any other questions in relation to that, members? So, our members are you content for the department to proceed to make the rule contingent upon those questions being addressed? Yep, thank you. So, members, just check with Clark, are we ready on that next session, or do we need to take a short break?
10:45, officials wouldn't be here yet, so we
Okay.
probably need to adjourn.
Okay, so members, then we'll be moving into, as per our agreement at the meeting on the 16th of January, the next briefing session will take place in closed session. So can I ask members to agree that we move into closed session, and I'll ask broadcasting to take us into closed? Agreed, thank you, members. Members from the clerk that we're in open session.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
Or afternoon.
Confirmed open now.
We're meeting now.
Of all the former BCCs, did you see John?
Yes, I saw John just leaving. It is, yeah. Small world.
Okay, members, and thank you. Now, so we're resuming then at agenda item 13, and the briefing paper for this item starts at page 184, and this is a briefing by the NI Housing Executive Place Shaping Team. So I'd like to welcome the following representatives from the Housing Executive to the meeting. We have today Grania Long, who's Chief Executive, Alma Newbury, who is Director of the Strategic Housing Authority, and Sinead Collins, who is Head of South Place Shaping. So Tafalcha Rovalig, very welcome this afternoon, and Grania, I go back to yourself maybe and invite you to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members.
Thank you,
So,
Chair.
thank
Good
you.
afternoon, everyone, and thank you, as always, for your time and for the opportunity to present. And look, very, very pleased to be here to talk about place shaping. And I suppose fundamentally for us, for anybody who doesn't know what place shaping is, we're the Strategic Housing Authority, and fundamentally our role and our job is to ensure the right homes are built in the right places, and we will do everything that we can within our powers as an organisation to do that. So all of the focus of Elma and her team and Sinead and her colleagues from a place shaping perspective is about getting homes built and getting homes built in the right places and making the best use of land, but not just doing it in a way that is simply just about numbers, is actually about thriving communities and all of the benefits of that. So I'll just very, very briefly talk you through, well, first of all, this is so important, and I'm really delighted that we now have a housing supply strategy that is focused on the issue of supply and has additionality at its core. And while, as I say, we talk a lot about numbers sometimes as housing professionals, we are talking about homes. We're fundamentally about improving people's lives. But as I say, the homes are part of a community, and that integration of housing with land and all of the other infrastructure, social and environmental and economic infrastructure is so important. So, housing supply strategy is key, but the other key factor in this that I think we probably don't talk enough about in terms of the benefits to Northern Ireland is community planning. And I suppose, I think it's fair to say that over the last number of years, certainly my own view would be that community planning, both as a concept and the practical reality of community planning, is now that we are really seeing the benefits of that partnership at a local level between public sector partners and other partners across voluntary community sectors, and indeed increasingly so the private sector, and that's really having a benefit. And it's really driving new supply. And in fact, what Elma and Sinead will talk to you about is homes, quite frankly, that wouldn't have been built but for community planning and that partnership. And so that's a really positive and a very optimistic thing. But fundamentally what it does is it allows partners to sit together and talk about this, I suppose, what are the issues for that particular council area. And all 11 councils will have different set of priorities, and we know that, and we work closely with them. But then we work with them as their partner to say, okay, you know what your priorities are. How can we bring the best type of housing to that set of priorities and building them in the right place and in the right way. So we have a range of statutory responsibilities. I'm not going to go into them in lots and lots of detail. They're in your pack. But I think it's worth just, every time we map them out, even I am surprised at the breadth of the functions and the work that we do. So obviously we assess housing need. That's our role. We've been doing that for over 50 years, and that's crucially important. And that assessment of housing need then informs a document called the Commissioning Prospectus, which I've talked about a number of times at this committee. And that's the document that is published. It's on our website. It's open information. And that details essentially the social housing need at council level and at settlement level. So it's a document that goes right down to settlement level. And it gives you, as I say, the scale and the nature of social and affordable housing need. And we present to all 11 councils through our housing investment plans. And so the preparation of those plans are really important. And it is a very, very important part of what we do as a strategic housing authority, that we engage very closely with councils and we present, and I make myself available as chief exec, and so does Elma as director, and we walk all of the councils through that data and that information. And routinely we are asked, and rightly so, from elected members both in the Assembly and at a council level, to understand more about how we assess housing need. It's a complicated process. We understand that, and our role is to ensure that everybody understands it as best we can and make all of that publicly available. So there's no sense of, the housing executive have these numbers over there and we don't understand them. So very happy to go through that. We also prepare housing needs statements, and you'll be very well aware of this. We provide letters of support, and we in terms of housing development, and we engage with housing associations to inform both the housing type and the mix required in proposed housing schemes. So we're very, very involved in individual schemes. As I say, we prepare local development plans housing investment plans, and then as a consultee in the development of local development plans, we contribute to affordable housing policies by advising in the preparation of those local plans. We also, as an organisation, as the Strategic Housing Authority, we undertake a cyclical assessment of the potential of undeveloped housing executive land. So we also keep a very understandably, and as the Chief Accounting Officer with responsibility for stewardship of public funds, it's very important that I understand the entirety of the housing executive land portfolio, and as I say, what is on what we call our undeveloped land schedule, and we're always looking at that to see what could be brought forward for future housing development. We prepare development briefs. We transfer development sites to housing associations for new build, as you'll know. We manage the delivery of land and property disposals. And we also, as I say, represent and participate in all of those 11 community planning partnerships. So that's a big body of work, actually. And all of that is about driving housing output. And we can talk about some of the successes we've had recently. I think the fact that we have a housing supply strategy now with a target for 30% social and affordable housing is really, really important. It's a pivotal moment. We're delighted, obviously, as housing professionals, that there's a focus on housing supply across government, and we very, very strongly welcome that. And so we have been looking at, I suppose, our own capacity, all of the range of functions that I've talked about, and what we need to do more, and what potentially we might need in terms of additional powers and responsibilities now to really add to those powers that we currently have. I think we've already set out we have a crucial role both in enabling supply, but also we want to be in a position where we add to supply on our own land. We'll take questions. We're very happy to take questions on any of the detail, so I won't take up too much time because it's in the brief. But I think it's just worth noting that the housing need assessment that we undertake annually really gives the strongest indication both of the scale and the nature of housing need. People often, I understand why, refer to the waiting list as, you know, they look at waiting list numbers and assume that that's the best way of assessing housing need. The best way of assessing housing need is, yes, the waiting list is part of that, but when you take account of the fact that there's always churn, for example, and the range of other factors, really our housing need assessment, we would say, is the truest indicator. And as you know, the projection over the next 5-year period between 2023 and 28 is for 24,922 new homes. And again, we can cover that in as much detail as you like. Importantly, it's that document, that housing need assessment, that is then used by us in conjunction with the department to determine the new build programme. Okay, so we use that document and we use what we call the strategic guidelines to consider the spread of the new build programme, so that it's well spread geographically across Northern Ireland. And that's, so as I say, that's how the programme is set up, and we can go through that in detail. At the moment, the Social Housing Development Programme, we have set a target for 25-26, so from the 1st of April next year, of the need for 2,150 units, and 26-27, 2,300 units. And it's then through that commissioning prospectus, which I refer to, that we use to then advise housing associations as to where is the best or the optimum approach to identify sites that we could then support. So I'll finish, I suppose, just by mentioning two further aspects of our work, and then probably best to go into questions, is the fact that, as I say, place making, or place shaping as we call it, really is about a locally based approach to regeneration, and a housing led approach to regeneration. But it really goes beyond this idea that you just come in and you develop homes and you get out of there as quickly as possible. That's not how how you want to develop thriving communities where you integrate all of the right infrastructure. We have developed place shaping plans with local communities, and we have a number of examples which we'll cover with you this morning, that has led to homes being built that would not have been built, and some brilliant examples of that. I think, to finish, where I think that we need to now, we collectively, in terms of the housing supply strategy, really need to up our game, so to speak, is on the issue of use of public sector land and land assembly. And my own personal view would be, I think there's a lot more that we must do in terms of using public sector land to drive housing output. There was a really good project that was led by the Department for Communities with ourselves, which concluded in 2021 that the use of public sector land, with land being brought forward and the housing executive being given the powers to assemble land, would enable a much greater and much more prolific approach to developing housing. And I strongly agree with that. I think that has to be a natural next step for us as an organisation in terms of being given greater powers for land assembly. I suppose we've talked about this quite a bit at this committee. Housing subsidy is not just capital grant. There are other forms of subsidy, and land is a really, really important subsidy. So, our role is to reduce development risk. Housing associations, I think, benefit from that. I think their ability to raise private finance is enabled by the fact that there's a strategic housing authority that reduces development risk and enables homes to be built. But I thought I would just ask maybe Elma to talk a little bit about Tullycarnet Place Shaping Plan, which I think is a really exciting development, and Sinead is going to talk about a place shaping plan in Armagh that has also yielded new homes, with your indulgence, Chair.
And we could listen all day to that, but as brief as possible, because we are under significant time pressure now as well. So thank you, Alma. Go ahead.
Just very briefly, Tullycarnet, a large estate obviously in East Belfast, and we had a demolition programme for King's Road Flats. That actually had caused a number of issues locally in terms of what the putback was going to be, and it was a displacement of quite a number of elderly people as well, and there was a sense of we needed to do something different. So we had been working on the place shaping approach on a number of areas, so we felt that Housing Executive needed to lead this particular one, and we appointed Community Places who worked locally through the Neighbourhood Partnership. And actually, as a result of that, it was over a 12-month period, there was a community planning tool that was used for local people to identify what was the priorities in the area, what was good, what was not good, what they needed, what they would like to see. And that really developed then an action plan of what was required for that area. and that has now recently been published, and the Minister actually was in attendance at that. So out of that, what actually the additional benefit to that was, we were there in terms of what housing needed to be put back in the area, but we also identified sites that had a potential that we could include within a better re-imaging of that particular area. One example would be there's a site owned by the Education Authority, so through this partnership process we're able to then engage with them to see, are you going to use this particular site? If not, could you release that for that better solution for that particular area? So we're in negotiation with them. Also there was a library there that looked like it wasn't going to stay open, but when we looked at the consultation, actually there was quite a high demand and there's an opportunity there. What it also did was it galvanised the community again, because, as I say, it was quite fragmented and it had been through quite a lot of trauma in terms of the condition of the flats, and they are now taking a lead role through the neighbourhood partnership to actually deliver on and oversee the development and delivery of this. And our role is to come in on delivery of the housing component and make sure we can try to assemble the lands on the broader public sector.
Thank you, Alma. Thank you. I'll come back to that in a second. Go ahead, Sinead.
Thank you. So each of the community planning partnerships take a slightly different approach in how they deliver on their outcomes. But in Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon, there was agreement to focus on a place-based approach to achieve outcomes for local communities, and this is led heavily by extensive and meaningful consultation with local communities. The plans that have been developed, firstly in Armagh and then in Banbridge, and we're now working on Dromore, reflect the needs of customers and citizens, but they're not just focused on housing. There's a broad remit which also looks at the economy and health and well-being, poverty and social isolation. But the benefit of our role as community planning partners is that we can ensure that housing is a priority. And that's what we've done in these particular examples. So in Armagh, there's an action, Housing for Armagh City, which we're the lead partner on, through which a commitment is made through agreement with the whole of the Place Board to enhance mixed tenure and increase accessible and affordable housing in the city centre of Armagh, and to introduce the concept of a city centre waiting list. So this not only broadens the scope for housing development, but encourages the use of infill and brownfield sites. But it's also introduced an opportunity for our customers to consider home in an area which is not of a traditional single identity, which is hugely positive. So in line with this action, we supported the development of 42 new social homes at Ogle Street, right in the city centre. And this is a mixed tenure scheme which was taken forward by ARC Housing Association, and it includes a mix of house types. Singles will have apartments, 2 and 3 bedroom houses for families, and also wheelchair accessible accommodation. But this scheme has also been allocated, and a launch event took place in July 2024 as a Housing for All scheme, which we're hugely encouraged by. So we continue to work with the council in ABC to consider the potential of lands in public ownership, but we also have a data sharing agreement with them, so we can consider sites in each other's ownership and the benefits for future development, and that continues to progress. But a similar approach in Banbridge.
I really would love to give you the space, but I'm not going to be able to. Would you send us the other two in writing? I'm very keen to hear about them, but time doesn't allow today. I just do want to say in relation to Alma's, I really think that's 100% the correct approach. Strong on the ground consultation, outcomes coming out from those, and cross-departmental work. I think that's the way. Now, I don't know the particular example or how it's worked out, but what you have set out there in terms of the process and the outcomes, I think is really encouraging and the right way to do lots of other things. So I want to acknowledge that, but I do need to get the members' questions. So I'm going to go first to our Deputy Chair, Ciara.
Okay, and thank you very much. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to run after in the next 15 minutes or so because of another meeting. Well, folks, first of all, declaring interest in that. I've worked with Elma in the past, and housing-led regeneration is amazing, and the housing sector will be really proactive and wider ambitions that can happen by working closely with the team. So 100%. I suppose the main issue or area for me, it's not, and I understand that amount of work is put in regarding housing need and the fantastic work that you do and that you reporting every year to council. We have the plans, the stats are there. It's just with all that work done, is Elma particularly, is there other data that you think would be really, really useful if it was available that could support you? And I'll tell you why. A couple of things. Big issue for me is based on the number of singles that are on the waiting list. And then that's reflective of what's the need in the area, which is then and that information is so vitally important because obviously you're utilising that in all the discussions and all the meetings that you have, when in reality and I'm going for myself, particularly in Derry, and from what I know, these people aren't single. They may present as single, but they do have extended families, they do have children that's coming to see them, and I know you kind of consider that. And my frustration is I want to see family homes created. I don't want to see a proliferation because I am inundated with families now that are in 2 beds, that are in dire need for 3 beds. They have adults that are sleeping on sofas. And I know they're with the housing sector and they try to do their best, but given the reality of what's available out there. So it's just, I'm just asking, I'm a bit frustrated, and I know all the work that you're doing. Is there some kind of, has the formula that you've been using been reviewed recently? That's probably the one question. And then and that's around the housing type as well, and the housing mix then, because that data is reflecting on that. That's probably the main thing, because that kind of spills out then from councillors coming to me and going, you know, with 600 in temporary accommodation in the city. We have areas crying out. We have areas outside the local development plan. Developers are ready to build social houses tomorrow. They're getting letters from the housing sector basically say there's no need in that area, and people's coming back to me and going, there's crying out need, but there's been no consultation out there. People are directed to areas where they're building houses, and that's where they're ticking the boxes where they want to live, and they think they're going to have a greater chance. But ideally, they want to live in the community in which. And then, I know I'm ranting a wee bit, but likewise, infrastructure, we have a plan, and this is what we need, and this is the local development plan. This is where we can build. In reality, we have huge issues with infrastructure and water. So the plan may be there, but you've all them extra areas that you have to consider. Are you considering them in relation to the housing need, the future, the 5-year plan or whatever that you have? Housing needs to be built here, but in reality they mightn't be built for 8 or 9 years if you base on what DFI is saying, because of the level of infrastructure and what's needed. So I'm just saying, has housing need, the information used, been reviewed? Is there gaps and data that isn't available that maybe would be useful to have available, Emma, particularly for you, in relation to that detailed work that you do regarding housing need?
Okay, so there's a lot in that.
I know, because I've been trying to get to the bottom of it, I think, for a few meetings. So.
I know. So the housing need assessment has been peer reviewed a number of times, okay? So we would say that is a robust methodology.
Right.
All right. What you're mentioning there is about the waiting lists and the composition of that. Well, actually, that's for, you know, people who want to apply for accommodation. We have to go on independent objective need, as you know, and it has to be through the composition of that waiting list. So we would be encouraging people who are actually requiring a home, they apply in the right way. You're suggesting there, maybe is it fraudulent in some shape or form that people are putting down 1 bed when really they don't need 1 bed accommodation, they're looking for actually a family. But for us, we need to look at the waiting list, okay? The second thing I would say is that, and there is a majority of them are single, and there is quite a lot of elderly as well, you know, within our waiting list too. In terms of what we approve and support.
Can I just stop you? See, on the single part,
yes,
they may be single when they apply, but over time they get into relationships. You know, they have children, but so they're single when they apply at that moment in time, and that's what dictates the house bill. That's my frustration.
Right, okay. So, sorry, apologies. I thought you meant they apply to single, but actually, no. Right, okay. I understand what you're saying. We actually do a strategic housing market analysis,
yep.
Okay? So that is a 15-year projection, and that looks at a granular level, a local council level of new household forming. So that will come into that part of it, and it'll look at intermediate, owner-occupied and social housing requirements. So we can send you that, Ciara.
Oh, that would be useful.
And we have actually worked with through local development plans on that strategic housing market analysis as well. So that will show you new households forming as well. So we take that into account, okay?
Yeah.
But the housing need assessment is based on the waiting list when we go to do that assessment each year. And there is a high proportion of singles on that. There's no question of that. And the demographics are changing for us as well. So that suggests that we do need a certain proportion of single accommodation throughout our new build programme. But what I would say to you is that when we, and it would be through Sinead's teams who would do support letters for new build, that we look at what is right for that particular area and what is the composition there. And we do look to see a mix of family homes as well. We want to build sustainable communities, and that's part and parcel of how we do that. And in terms of the infrastructure that you're suggesting there, we're working very closely with Northern Ireland Water. Absolutely, there's challenges, there's no question. But what I would say is there is solutions to be had to actually enable development, and you know, developers themselves can put in solutions or work with the Northern Ireland Water to do that. So very much that's the approach that we would take. So I think for me it's very much, you know, we won't stop development, we can still continue with development even though there are all of those challenges that you have described, and we continue to have support for more sustainable types of communities. That's basically the whole place shaping approach.
And I think from my point of view there is a, as I say, and there was a lot in what you said, but I think I'm very comfortable we can spend as long as this committee ever wants on other days to give you, you know, lots of detail on the strategic housing market assessment and how we do that needs assessment. It is a very complicated model that we use, but it is driven by the data, you know, the projections, population projections as well. I think the issue for me is not the assessment of need, quite honestly, and it's fundamental. We all know we are not building enough social housing, and so last year, you know, we bid for 2,000 homes and we were given the funding for 1,500. So last year we were 500 short, and then this financial year to the end of March this year, you know, we will build 1,400 homes and possibly more, depending on how the final January monitoring round works through in terms of output. So, you know, fundamentally the issue for me is how we get the numbers up in terms of new build. And you know, the strategic guidelines enables us to ensure that is spread across all the council areas, so we have a really, really good mix. We will support everywhere we can support, you know, and what's good about our needs assessment is it enables us to do that. But the fundamental point is we need a really steady level of investment over many, many years to get the numbers up before we are in a position whereby we can all feel we're meeting housing need at the most local of levels. That for me is the critical piece. That's where, if I was being asked where would you focus all your attention, that's where I would focus all my attention. Certainly where we want to focus all our attention is how we get as much subsidy as we can and how we stretch that subsidy as effectively as possible.
Thank you.
Just quickly then, in relation to obviously what change, where people now can list as many as they want, what impact is that on assessing housing need? Well, it's before you only had the limited
so
choice.
it was the two areas, and then we assessed the need assessment on the first preference. So there was a view that, well, that meant that people who actually wanted to live in an area of high need, they were going to another area under the housing solutions. There was always that challenge. But what I would say to you is, as Gráinne was saying there, we support areas where there's all need. We look to see what we can bring forward there. So areas that would have been very high housing need, we still will look to try to support. Okay. With the fundamental review of allocation, we have now got the opportunity now where people can extend their areas of choice, obviously, up to 99. I think we're seeing on average people are extending up to about 20. And we're now doing a piece of work where we're looking at the second preferences now. So we're looking to see, is that taking us to a wider, different area? And if so, then we would be able to look to seek to support then development in those areas. So it's opening up sort of the wider areas of where we could support that previously we would be looking at the first.
Just on that then, with regards to targeting social need, it's been taken out of the housing supply strategy. What's your thoughts on that in relation to really focusing in on areas of highest need?
Sorry, in relation to where? Targeting
areas of housing need, yeah.
Well, the strategic guidelines will still support that. So we have the housing market analysis, we have the housing need assessment, but when we distribute then the funding for the programme, we'll look at the strategic guidelines. So that will still look at the areas that are targeting areas of acute need. So that will look at the length of time people have been on the waiting list, for example, and the supply had been in that area. And we will then, through the commission prospectus, direct the housing associations to look at those areas to seek to bring forward sites onto the programme. So that would be how we would direct areas of acute need.
No, that's great. Thank you.
So I'm just going to do a quick one as a follow-up to that, and then we're going to go to members. So I have raised a few times in this, and I'm going to break it into an example this time to try to get it across. What we find is that people will put their first preference as somewhere they think they have a hope of getting a house. Yeah. But that might not be where they want to live. So somebody, for example, in my own area, lives in the Brantry, but knows there's no houses in the Brantry, and that's an issue in itself. So their first indication might well be Caledon, because they know there's some houses there. Is there a way for you to adjust your system so that over a longer term, and I recognise the houses just don't exist, but over a longer term you can capture the fact that there are a significant cohort of people who want houses in the Brantry, and we start to work that into the plan, rather than the information would appear to indicate that everybody wants to live in Caledon, which is maybe not necessarily true. How do we do that?
So the fundamental review of allocation is actually going to support that. And so that means that if somebody wants to live in an area where they know or they think there isn't the opportunity, they're able to even put that area down, okay? And we will analyse that to see if there's support there. If it's in, for example, a rural area as well, we'll do latent demand tests. So we have a programme we do annually, about 10 per year within our strategy. So we go out to areas where we know, because of our front-facing service, that people have a desire to live in a particular area, but we go to areas where we know there's land availability, because previously latent demand tests were being done where we weren't able to bring forward sites for development, which was really, it didn't yield what we wanted to do. So that's another approach we do. And then the teams themselves would do large scale site identification studies as well to bring forward sites in areas where we know that there's that desire to live in those areas.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully place shaping in those rural areas, I am particularly interested in that, getting into those proactively. What I find is, to a degree, people in the Brantry don't even think about housing executive, they just know, and they've sort of moved on to trying to find other solutions to all of that. So I would love to see that. But anyway, you have indicated progress in that respect, and we'll keep an eye on that. I'm going to go to members now in order, with Brian, Morris, Kelly, and Daniel. Are you?
I won't attend, Chair. I'll have to leave at another meeting.
Okay, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Grania, Elma, Sinead, for your attendance. I've always welcomed that the housing executive has seen themselves as builders of communities, not just houses, and you've said there about, as well as looking at housing need figures, that you also look at land availability, and you look at where there's need for regeneration and initiatives like building successful communities, and I know the work you do in the Shankill with Build and so on, and Glencairn, the place shaping exercise there. So it's important that it's not just a formula, that it's working with communities to regenerate areas. So two questions. One which I raised earlier with Mark O'Donnell, so the Chair might want me to be brief, but the whole issue of empty homes.
Sure, I always want you to be brief.
I know.
That's a standing order.
I will follow up maybe with an email to you, but I've raised that with you before, Grania, and you said there used to be an empty home strategy or unit, but I still think which no longer exists, but I think there's a need to focus on that, otherwise they become like rotten apples in areas that cause blight and misery for those that are living attached to them, especially when they're long-term derelict. And secondly, can you give us an update on the high-rise blocks? I know at one stage you announced they were all going to come down. I know you've had some pushback at community level. So some of those demolitions either are happening or have happened, but are you reviewing that, given that there's still a desire from people to live in them?
Very happy to correspond on empty homes, and we can pick that up at any point that's appropriate to you. Yes, so our tower block strategy was agreed by the board several years ago, and what it did was it looks across all of our tower blocks. I should say, as an aside, as a landlord, when you compare us, we are the largest public landlord on these islands. When you compare us to other public landlords, we actually have very few tower blocks. So, if we were to, compare us with Wheatley Homes, which was previously Glasgow City Council, much more, much higher level or proportion of its stock, and look, some of the boroughs in London, for example, or in Manchester have much larger numbers of tower blocks. So we did a very, very large piece of work several years ago, and the board and indeed the department approved a tower block strategy that categorised our tower blocks into three types. the tower blocks that we would, and so all the view of the board of the housing executive is that all our tower blocks will be demolished at some point in the future. And we categorised all tower blocks into 3, so what we call our short term, our medium term and our long term. And we've been working through over the last number of years, starting with those short term blocks on the demolition of a number of blocks that have gone ahead. And in fact, in the vast majority of cases, either the survey or the demolition or the consultation and decanting with the community is either on schedule or ahead of schedule. We've had a number of issues, not unique to even to the housing executive or to Northern Ireland. Demolition contractors are often in short supply, so you do the work and then suddenly it takes longer to get a contractor. So our what we call our short term, we are almost there, and we have, I think, the big significant challenges for any landlord right now in relation to high rise or multi-storey buildings, but particularly high rise, is building safety and decarbonisation. So the kind of the issues that were part of the consideration when we put the tower block strategy together, some of those issues are more acute. So we know much more now about the importance of decarbonisation. And so we now have to factor that in. We know much, much more about building safety. The housing executive, just to give assurance, is, I would say, ahead of. So we're certainly ahead of the legislative framework here. So we have looked at the forthcoming and the emerging legislative framework in England and Scotland and Wales in terms of building safety across all of our stock, and we've put in place a range of measures. So we are doing things way beyond what the law here requires us to do, but that's the right thing to do, and our tenants rightly expect that, and of course they do. So we are now at a stage where we are, as we set out when we put the strategy together, we're reviewing the strategy, and that review is as I say, the public will be well aware of that. As I say, we've built that review into the strategy, and that will look at a whole range of issues, including we will rerun the economic viability test. We will have to take account of any additional information we have on building safety, and we will have to take account of information that we have on the cost of decarbonising, and any other information that's relevant to us. And so that review will take place in 25-26 in the 1st of April 25-26 year, and again might be useful for us to at the right point come a brief in relation to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentations. I'll come at it from a different angle. Say, for instance, John and Mary have been looking for a house for 3 years. They haven't got one. They've gone into the private rented sector. They've allowed their application to lapse. People like that are no longer counted in your waiting list. And that does not have been taken into account, especially in my area where there are so many private rental opportunities available along the coast and right up and through into Coleraine. And there's an awful lot of people who want houses who aren't actually on the list. Have you factored that in?
So we have a very open waiting list here, and our waiting list is pretty much open to everybody. And so unless you don't have a legal right to remain in Northern Ireland or pass the habitual residency test, or if you've undertaken any activity that would preclude you, and it would be very serious criminal activity, then the waiting list is open. So I'm happy to talk to you about individual cases, but in the vast majority of cases there isn't a reason why somebody shouldn't remain on the waiting list.
Misunderstood.
Yeah.
There are people who are living in rented accommodation and have been for such a time because they cannot get social housing, and they're now no longer on the waiting list. And that's a large number of people, especially in my constituency, who are not on the list, and therefore your list doesn't account for that large number. The other point is, I have been with a developer, and he is being forced to put so many single bed units in his development that it's now bordering on where it's viable enough to go ahead. So again, that criteria is based on your current waiting list, which doesn't have the factors that people who are looking for social housing, families, but aren't actually on the list. And there's no way of putting a message out there. Join the list, even if you think there's no chance of getting a house, stay on the list, because then that builds your figures up.
So on the first point, so forgive me if I misunderstood, I thought you meant we were precluding them from joining the waiting list. No. So again, and I think Alma said it earlier, we will count who's on the waiting list. That's our role as a housing executive, as the Strategic Housing Authority. What we will always do is encourage people, if they feel they should join the waiting list, we will always encourage people. And in fact, we go way beyond that. As Elma said, we undertake what we call latent demand tests, where we proactively go out and engage with the local community and say, if you are not on the waiting list and you feel you should be, then we want to hear from you. So my view would be we are as proactive as any Strategic Housing Authority would be in terms of encouraging people if they feel they need to join the waiting list. What we will then do is assess people in terms of their points, and their housing circumstances will determine the points that they get, and that will give them relative priority on the waiting list. So, I mean, for me, it's as clear as that. We have an open waiting list. The law sets and statute sets out clearly to us what we must do. I'm not sure about that individual case, what the issues are in relation to an individual apartment, whether it's us or a planning authority, but happy to talk about it.
It's the plan, the developer wishes to build a development. The development is been given a pad that it is passable, given certain criteria. But the sticking point is the insistence of the housing executive in my area of too many single bed units within the development, which is bordering on it not being viable to go ahead.
Right, okay. Well, again, I mean, our role is, as I said earlier, our role is to advise a planning authority as a statutory consultee on essentially the scale and the nature of housing needs. So if we're doing that, we're doing it on the basis that the need would support that. So again, happy to talk about that individual case. Always very happy to do that.
I have no issue with your methodology.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is your methodology is not correct. There are far too many families in private rental accommodation who are locked into private rental accommodation and feel there's no point in joining the housing list because there are no houses in my area or in any other area. So therefore, you have done a lot of work proactively to get them to register, but it hasn't worked.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes back to the point that I made, which is if it was down to me, where would we all be focusing our attention on? Getting homes built. I think the methodology, respectfully, is sound. What we're not collectively doing is getting enough homes built, and the more homes will absolutely relieve that pressure for people who either feel I'm not going to join the waiting list because I'm not going to get anything, or I've been on the waiting list for too long, and that's where all our focus is. So I think we're all in agreement on that.
There may be a way to think about how we look at getting data in place that reflects those people who would ideally be on the housing executive waiting list but have moved on by being forced to move on to other, and still capturing that they would like to be in a housing executive housing in a particular area. I think that's but it's work for another day. Morris or Andy, I'm just going to go quickly to
just on that point, I wanted to come in.
Very briefly.
Unless I'm mistaken, Grania, can't an applicant defer their application where they get housed in private rented sector on a short-term lease? They can stay on the waiting list, but they can defer their application where they have a short-term lease, so those people are still being captured.
That's my understanding, yes. And also if every year we would do a renewal for people who have been on the waiting list, if they've moved address, do they still want to remain? So it's up to, obviously that individual to keep renewing their application is what we would recommend.
I agree with everything you say, except that you're not catching people who are in long-term rental and have lapsed and have not rejoined. And in my area, as well as that problem, you have land banking in all the coastal areas, not just mine. So it's a problem I think you need to look at a bit more in detail.
Yeah.
Valid points, yeah. Kelly?
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, folks, for coming along. Can I just say that quite a lot of, I don't have to ask a lot of questions because the quarterly meetings we have, I can ask them there and I get quite a lot of updates there. But I'm just wondering, place shaping does take into consideration the partnership approach with councils and others, but when I looked at councils' community plans, some of them have housing in it, some of them don't, and that's quite surprising. Do you think it would help your team if all of the community plans had like headlines that they needed to report on, and if they say that they don't need housing, which would be surprising, that they could do that, or that would help?
I mean, I'm sure Elma will have a view on this as well. I think, and in fact, I think Elma said it, all community plans are different and will prioritise the issues that are local to the area. Would it help? Yes. I mean, anything that helps, as I say, get homes built is a good thing. I think what we find is a really strong level of engagement within have to say all councils, and I think all councils fully understand, both at officer level and at elected official level, the importance of housing, and that housing need is so well spread now across all 11 councils. But you're right, I think different community plans maybe pay, it's an emphasis point. What we certainly find when we engage with councils is there isn't a council that isn't talking to us, and we're all working very, very closely together. Is there anything?
Yeah, no, and the local development plan process has actually given us that opportunity to, put forward the need for social housing to be a priority. So that has been a mechanism that has been very advantageous to us, to the point that we've even now had some councils taken forward housing policies within their LD pleas that, new developments coming forward need to have an element of affordable. So if it's not as a priority on their community planning and thematic areas, it's the local development plan process is another route that we're going through as well.
Very good, thank you. I just wanted to ask then about land availability. How early, I'll explain this, how early do you get notification from the departments? Is it just it goes on to the public market and that's it? Do you actually get notification of public land coming available earlier?
It's called the D1 process that is managed through LPS. The challenge is, and when it comes on to the LPS, obviously all the public sector are able to look at that, and that's where we are getting a number of our sites coming forward. However, it's about the quantity of them coming forward. So there's a number of departments through that public land for housing project that we piloted. There were departments who had land holdings that there would have potential there if they didn't have a foreseeable or immediate use. Could they bring them forward? So that's the area that we see has a real opportunity to bring forward land for housing. And back to the point earlier as well, what we are finding is when we see development happen in an area, that actually does attract people to actually come forward and put their names on the waiting list as well. So we see very much that public land could have would be a real lever within this.
I know I was on very recently. I know that the Minister for Finance is reviewing the estate, and I asked her a question about, for instance, where the Education Authority has changed its building and taken down the big tower block. There's a car park across the road that, to be honest, the tower block space will be their car park, and there's a massive car park sitting there that could be used for housing. Bonus is, under the ground, there's bound to be water infrastructure there. So I'm just wondering on the water infrastructure side of things, the developer contributions element of what Northern Ireland Water may need to enable a lot of developments, is that going to put a huge amount of pressure then on the potential new build budget?
So I think, generally speaking, in relation to wastewater infrastructure capacity, I think our view has been, well, first of all, we work very closely with Northern Ireland Water. We've engaged with them. We always engage with them. That engagement has ramped up, obviously, over the last year, few years, in fact, as the constraints became very acute and it became very obvious that this could begin to impinge on the new build programme. We met with them on the 16th of January. We met with them before Christmas. I've got a meeting with Sarah Venning coming up shortly. So we have very strong, very good engagement. And so what we have done is, the programme that I talked about, the Social Housing Development Programme, Elma's team have provided that to Northern Ireland Water, and they have used that in their assessment. Okay, and the programme that we develop is based on a risk assessment also. So it is the kind of the programme as it sits. In other words, what we feel will be built in the next year and 2 years, and given Northern Ireland Water the opportunity to look and see where those schemes might be that could be at risk. And I suppose my answer to you would be, I think we need to look at this on a scheme by scheme basis. There are solutions that can be found to individual schemes. We will know, and the technical experts will know relatively quickly what is possible. But I think what we've been very clear about is the more we speak, the more we engage, the more open we are, and the earlier we can do that, the less likely it is. And so we don't feel that the programme next year, 25-26, is at risk as a result of what we're seeing, but we have to continue those conversations, and we have got to get those solutions in place. Some of the solutions are relatively easy to achieve with not that much finance. Where the solutions are more expensive, then it will have to be down then to the developer to make the decision, is that scheme still viable, and that will have to be built into their viability assessment. But we want to work with, and we'll continue, as we always do, to work with everybody. Just the sooner we can get those conversations and keep the focus on a scheme by scheme basis. I'm worried that there's a narrative that it's, overall it's making new build more difficult, or it could turn off or constrain new build entirely. That's not what I'm seeing in the numbers. I'm certainly seeing opportunities for solutions, and we need to keep focused on that.
Yeah, the housing supply strategy at 33,000 social homes 2,200 a year for 15 years will meet that target. My last question is just about mixed tenure and that place shaping. I'm just wondering, so mixed tenure, the definition of that is largely to do with the use of the physical house. I'm just wondering, the changes we know will be down the line very shortly for the intimidation points, and I'm thinking about the housing allocation. Is there anything within that mixed tenure about building that housing for all, so that we do have a mixture of families and people together, and older people? We're going to have a lot of older people coming up now because we're getting an ageing population. I'm just wondering how much that's framed into the place shaping.
Yeah, so with every development, especially larger developments, our aim is to promote mixed tenure, the mixed tenure approach, and we work with housing associations to see how achievable that is. You know, we'll look at the profile of the waiting list and we'll try and get a robust mix of house types and sizes included in that, you know, so the development is sustainable. Some developments are more successful than others in getting the housing association on board with delivering another tenure within that development. But when the development is on the programme, when it's programmed, it's at that stage then we can consider whether it would be could be included in the Housing for All programme. So we would work with the housing association and with our Housing for All, the new team that's with us now, to look at the profile of the waiting list, to see if that could be achievable. So, I mean, there's a lot in the pipeline, but we look specifically at schemes that are already on the programme, where all the groundwork has already been done and agreeing, you know, the mix and the type, and the support is already there. So, yeah, we're actively looking across the board, across all our schemes on the programme. But I suppose the opportunity in the place shaping approach is looking at those non-traditional areas where we haven't looked before, like, you know, city centres and in Banbridge and in Armagh, and that's where we're more likely to achieve housing that's going to be appealing to a wider section of the community.
I know that the issue really is that those who are at the very top of the points are people who have high points for a reason, and if they're the people who are awarded all of the house, it's how we can make sure that's a sustainable community, and we don't have antisocial behaviour, or we don't have other issues coming in, and it's that mix. And that's why I wonder if the housing points system, if it can be sort of treated almost like segments of points as opposed to whoever happens to be the highest, because in an area, having a single man placed somewhere who maybe has addiction issues will need to be close to the addiction issue support, as opposed to maybe the house he has down for a second or third choice, which is outside of that. So it's that place shaping.
If you don't mind, very quickly, Chair. So I think this is where it's, for me, this is in terms of how the system works. It's less about the points and the and the points that individual has and the allocation of that property, and that's where having teams of really good, very experienced local lettings managers are really important. And that's, if I may say so, what the housing executive does really well. So we will sit down and we will look at the entirety of the scheme. We'll understand the needs of the person at the top of the waiting list. But, you know, as every landlord has the opportunity in terms of if a new scheme comes forward or a set of allocations come forward, you can get you can mix, you know, you can mix allocations from the top of the waiting list with your own internal transfers. And so all landlords really always must be thinking about, we've got some brilliant lettings managers who know their area really well. They know who's on the waiting list. They know what's going to work and what won't work. Or if it's something's not going to work, that person might need additional support. Who do we engage with? So I would say that's less about the points and the point system and more about getting your allocations really, really effective and well, and good old-fashioned housing management.
Can I just say... Sorry, Kelly, no, I'm going to have to be fair to Andy. I'm going to have to be fair here.
I just want to thank you for the
local
office, because they're brilliant. And
Go ahead, Andy, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just one question, as I know we're pressed for time. Grania, in terms of your briefing document provided, point 3 in terms of housing needs assessment refers to using obviously the methodology that you've outlined in great detail, 24,922 new social housing units. And then obviously if you go further down, it highlights obviously the targets for each of the corresponding years over that 5-year period, 23 to 28. How do you feel that aligns to the housing supply strategy? Because I think the figures outlined is circa 10,000 with what has been achieved in the previous years and what the ambition is for the years up to 28. That gives obviously a shortfall of nearly 15,000. How do you feel that aligns to the current ambition of the housing supply strategy?
It's a very good question, Emma. Do you want to? Because we talk about this a lot in terms of when we were working with the department in terms of the strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and it's that debate around the strategic housing market analysis and the future requirements in terms of population growth, and also then the balance with the housing need assessment that we have, because within that there will be people within the housing needs assessment who are in a home that is no longer reasonable for them. So, but it's still a home. So that's part of the debate that we need to have around that. And also there's a finite budget with obviously all of the departments. So what we push for is the maximum that we can get within the budget constraints to start to increase the levels of development, and that our intention is that we would build that up throughout, the term of the strategy. And if we can overachieve what that target is, well, that would be what we would be seeking to do. So for me, I think what I would be saying is it's a stepped increase, and that we're seeking to look at levers that we can do to bring forward and increase supply, like public land, what we've all discussed. So for me, I think it's the correct approach that we're taking within the housing supply strategy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and obviously given those figures that outline, I'll not rehearse them again. It'd be fair to say we've a lot of catching up to do.
Definitely do. And I think, Chair, if I may just finish on this point, I think that, I keep coming back to that point around how we get new homes built and the importance now with the housing supply strategy of making sure that capital investment for new build social housing is secured. And over a long number of years, we'd had a very, very good number of years of capital finance for new build social housing from a range of different housing ministers had prioritised. We will continue, I'm sure, under this minister to continue to see that. And I think the fact that now the housing supply strategy is an executive priority means that all departments understand its importance. But as you said, I think the kind of making sure that when we're setting those targets, they're underpinned by capital finance and land as subsidy, but also we have to take account of the fact that we won't go from, even if people time and money were no object, wouldn't that be lovely, we won't go from 2,000 a year to 4,000 a year easily. There are capacity issues across the piece, including the construction industry, but they would be good problems to have, I think.
Just final chart. But given that point, Grania, that we need to really be going to the 4,000 or 5,000 per year, and obviously finances dictate we can only be hitting towards the 2,200 as per the ambition of the housing supply strategy. How can we, or how do you feel, and this is the $1 billion question, we can get to that point of 4,000 to 5,000 homes and meet the need that is the true reality?
Well, I think it's a combination of. And quite understandably, this is something we talk about a lot in the housing executive. I think it's a combination of supporting and enabling housing associations to do as much as they can, and that's our job. And I think we've set out today how we do that. And anything that we can do to reduce development risk helps and enables housing associations to increase their capacity. We must have much better approaches to the use of public land for housing. It is a very, very slow process. It is very constrained. Public bodies, can hold on to land, I think, for much longer than they can in other jurisdictions. I would like to see a much more agile approach to the use of public land, and enabling us as the Strategic Housing Authority to be able to do more by way of land assembly. So I think that's a second lever that I would look at. We've talked about this at length, the importance of the housing executive now being freed up to enable us to build on our own land, and I think that would make an impact and a difference. It'll be slow and it'll be small numbers, and we'll build up to that. And that's not to replace housing associations, that's to add to that. So I think a combination of all of those, I think, plus that long-term approach to capital investment.
To address true need, we need to be working towards that 4,000 or 5,000 per year.
I think we've set out clearly what in terms of the projected housing need for over the 5-year period is for just under 25,000. But as I say, once you then put that into a long-term housing supply strategy, when you layer on top of it all the capacity issues, I think the housing supply strategy has got the numbers right. The critical piece for me, as I say, is how we get from we haven't been at 2,000 homes for nearly 2 years now, and the short-term focus now has to be on how do we get back up to 2,000 homes next year.
But I suppose what I'm interested in is we obviously have a huge needs piece here and the housing supply strategy, and we're placing a lot of weight and emphasis on the housing supply strategy, but the true reality for many people out there in society and within our communities is the housing supply strategy isn't going to cut it for them, because the true reality is, if we look at your own figures here, Grania, the nearly 25,000, if that is our ambition, 2,200, and hopefully we can go beyond that, we need to be working towards the conditions of nearly 5,000 per year based on your own figures here in this document.
I think I suppose my own view would be the housing supply strategy is the first time we've had a strategy from all of government and from all of the departments. So I think that's hugely important. I think it makes a very, very, very strong commitment to social housing and social and affordable housing. I think there's a number of levers now coming out of that, including public land, including the intermediate housing model, and a range of other levers. So I think the strategy gives us the best lever that we have in front of us to do that. And, you know, fundamentally this is about, I think, you know, we can talk lots about the numbers, but housing is also about the levers that you need to use to get you there. And I know I keep coming back to this today, but the importance of capital investment over the long term, plus land and good land assembly, will put us in a very, very strong position. So I have to say I'm very confident in what I see in the strategy, but we have to get moving now, and the action is the critical piece. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it's hugely welcome to have the strategy, but I'm just looking to push beyond that, maybe be a bit more ambitious.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks,
Longest one question in the world ever, but fair play. It was a good one. So listen, and we do have to vacate the room, so we will have to move on. Thank you very much for the session. My own example that I used inadvertently reminded me of a very direct connection and a fond connection to the housing executive, in that my family were involved in what became known as the Caledon eviction, where members of my family had protested against the allocation of houses in Caledon. They actually wanted them in the Brantry, to go back to that example. My grandmother, godmother and mother were in the house when the state moved in to evict them from the house, and my mother was expecting me on the day of that eviction. And one of the things that flowed from all of that was the creation of the housing executive. So I have a very fond interest in it, I have to say, in that respect. But listen, thank you. That's really important work. We will certainly be picking up on some of this stuff again, given its importance. But thank you for today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, members, moving on swiftly to agenda item 11, forward work programme, copy of which is at page 178. Can I please draw your attention to the change in date for the welfare mitigations briefing, which has moved to the 20th of February since this pack was published. You will see it updated in next week's papers. Members, any comments or content to note the forward work programme?
Content.
Thank you. Any other business, members? So yes, agenda item 12, any other business. There's one issue I just wanted to raise in relation to that, and I probably should have mentioned earlier and it escaped my notice, but from Jerry Carroll's briefing last week, there was a number of items Jerry had agreed to pass on, and he has passed on a number. One of them was a raised briefing on compulsory purchase orders, which we received. He also had mentioned and had agreed that he would pass on a raised paper on rent controls. And just maybe as a reminder, if members agree, that may have been just inadvertent, but could we check back if Jerry can forward that? I think that's the only outstanding item.
There was one from London on rent control.
Yeah, that's a new Economics Foundation report, but there was also a raised report on that day. So it'll be useful to have all of that information. So thanks for that, members. Any other business? No, thank you, members. Then final item 14, date, time and location of the next meeting. Next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 6th of February, room 2025, here in room 29. Thank you, members, indeed, and the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all. Right.
Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.